All right, we're ready.
Okay, I would now like to call the March 18th, 2026 Longmont Sustainability Advisory Board meeting to order. Could we please start with a roll call?
Yes, Robert Davidson.
I'm here.
Corkit Oneron is not going to be able to join us today. Ethan Augreen,
Here.
Alex Solomeo,
Here.
Jeff Garrick,
Here.
Alyssa Harding,
Here.
Daniel Leonard,
Here.
Lisa Knobloch.
Here.
Susan Bartlett will be joining us in a little while. Heather McIntyre is here, and Lauren Harding.
Here.
And then we have some staff members with us. We have Jennifer Apperson, Hewitt Apperson, and Zach Blazek and Jen Uten, Jennifer will be presenting a little bit later. And then Councilmember Culcuffer will not be able to join us tonight either, but Chair, you have a quorum.
All right, thank you, Heather. I'll start by reading our land acknowledgement statement. We acknowledge that Longmont sits on the traditional territory of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute, and other indigenous peoples. We honor the history and the living and spiritual connection that the First Peoples have with this land. It is our commitment to face the injustices that happened when the land was taken and to educate our communities, ourselves, and our children to ensure that these injustices do not happen again. And our inclusion statement. The Sustainability Advisory Board embraces diverse perspectives from its members and the public. To create an inclusive space where everyone feels welcome to share their opinion, the board asks that all attendees listen and speak with respect and avoid attacks on individual or specific group identities. Up next on our agenda is the approval of the minutes of the last meeting. Did anyone have any corrections or modifications they believe needed to be made? Well, if there are none that anyone wants to recommend, is there a motion to approve those as drafted?
Move to approve the minutes.
All right. Do we have a second?
Seconded.
All right. All those in favor? And any opposed? I think that was all the hands there. All right. Well, thank you. That carries. Um, okay. Agenda revisions. Lisa, did we have anything that we needed to modify in the agenda as presented?
Yeah, Heather and I are going to share. Council discussed the process, revising the process slightly for the interviews for board appointments at their council meeting last week. And we just have a summary of that to share with you all. So just wanted to add that under items from staff.
Okay. Well, before we move into the general business, I just wanted to kind of do a quick overview of some of those major topics we've got. So we'll do the land use planning and zoning overview discussion. Then we'll cover the feedback from the March 10th report presentation to the city, the building energy code item to the council for April 14th, and then that council process change. So that's a decent amount of main topics to kind of hit over the course of the meeting, and I just want to make sure we're all cognizant of those things as we're contemplating the level of engagement on any particular topic, and make sure we don't squeeze too much into the beginning or into the end in lieu of what we do at the beginning. So just think about that as we're moving through. With that, our first item up for general business, though, is the land use planning and zoning overview and intersections with sustainability. So, Jennifer, if you want to take it away.
Awesome. Can you see my screen?
We sure can.
Okay, perfect. So just quick introductions. Jennifer Hewitt Apperson, Principal Planner here with the City of Longmont. I received the Long Range Planning Program for the city, which includes comprehensive planning, historic preservation, and special projects, other duties as assigned. Zach, I'm going to have you introduce yourself and your role as well.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Zach Blazek, Senior Environmental Sustainability Planner. A lot of my work is in the development realm, looking at the intersection of land use and the environment. And I also do some long range stuff.
Great. Thanks, Zach. All right. Okay, there we go. So just as a quick note, this is going to be a bit of a fire hose situation. I'm going to be covering a lot of information. So if there's anything that you would like to see more detail on, more detailed discussion on in the future, please let me or Lisa know, and we'll be happy to arrange something. So let's talk a little about how Longmont has evolved. So in its early days, it was a 1 square mile plat. It's roughly from 9th Avenue to First over to Martin and then Bowen. And it was in fact the first planned community in Boulder County. Next batch of slides, I'm gonna whip through really quickly. It's basically a time series of how Longmont has evolved in terms of its city limits. All right, 1871, 1910s, 20s, 40s, 50s, 60s. Can you tell when the car became really commonplace? 70s, we continued to fill in more in the 80s as the airport and some other things were annexed. 90s, and this is roughly-ish where we are today. So, yeah, so we've definitely, there have definitely been a lot of changes. Now I'm going to talk about the evolution of zoning in Longmont. So I know one of the board members asked about that at the last time. So in the 1940s, that's right around 1940s when we first got planning, or first got zoning, I should say. There were 6 zoning districts altogether, and this was the city limits. As you can tell, we had a central business district along Main Street. We had some residential on either side. We had some commercial down to the south, and again throughout the main corridors. So it was a pretty simple zoning map. So in the 60s, this is not terribly clear, but what you can see is this is Main Street and this is R4. This is the historic east side. This is historic west side. So they originally had been zoned for the lowest density single family, and now all of a sudden they got jacked up to R4. The residential neighborhoods were upzoned. There were lower density residential zones on the outer parts of town. This zoning really kind of kicked off tear downs, conversions of single family homes to commercial and multifamily uses, and construction of new multifamily uses in the historic east and west sides. So this was a really common trend throughout the country and actually catalyzed the historic preservation movement nationwide. So 70s brought us what are generally known as planned unit developments. Here they were referred to as unit developments. So you'll hear me call them PUDs or PUDs. They are essentially site-specific zoning codes. These at the time were generally limited to residential developments in Longmont. Now, in the 80s, we saw more PUD development, as well as a zoning district that was specific to the historic East Side neighborhood, residential low density established, or RLE. This zoning district was a neighborhood initiative in response to the community outcry over increasing tear downs of original homes, replacement with multifamily and commercial uses. There were also specific development standards that were established for the neighborhood aimed at maintaining community character. There were a lot of density and various block averages and such. So that remained for a few decades. So by the 2000, Longmont was approaching its current land area. Commercial PUDs began in the late 80s, and PUDs as a whole continued to grow in use. By 2000, Longmont had 24 possible zoning districts, up from the original 6. So this last map this is the last zoning map before our current land development code or current zoning code was adopted in 2018. At this point, overlay zones had become more common, and there had been a specific airport influence zone put into place, which is this big oval thing you see over here. The early 2000s is really when the FAA started making local governments nationwide do these airport influence zones and various overlays to varied degrees of detail. So at this point, there were 21 specific what we call conventional zoning districts plus 5 possible overlay zones. Which brings us to Envision Longmont, the city's comprehensive plan that was adopted in 2016. Envision Longmont was not the first comprehensive plan for Longmont. We have plans dating back to at least the 80s but beyond, some from the 70s. We have a nice cabinet that has our archived plans in there. So the city has we've been doing planning for a very long time. So what is Envision Longmont? This is something I know have heard about. It was adopted in 2016. We are definitely due for an update, but it is the city's long-range multimodal and comprehensive plan. It's intended to guide growth, development, transportation, land use, and multimodal travel in the city over the next 10 to 20 years. I will say that the transportation component of it was updated in the last couple of years, so there is a fresh transportation multi and mobility master plan out there. The plan has a framework, which basically is an overview of how the plan works, how to use it. Policy framework, which really gets into the goals, the guiding principles for growth, sustainability, and community development. The growth framework, which really identifies these future land use map categories, or these land use categories throughout the city, and how they all interrelate to each other. And then we have implementation strategies, which are the action steps and responsibilities for putting the plan into practice. We track all of this through the Longmont Indicators program, which Francie Kirk-Jaffe keeps running smoothly and has handles the tech side of that and herding all of us cats really well. So continuing on, this is Longmont's planning area. So Envision Longmont addresses both incorporated and unincorporated properties or areas within the Longmont planning area. I'll call this the LPA from now on. Intergovernmental agreements, or IGAs, with Boulder and Weld counties address annexation and development of unincorporated property within the planning area. Annexation of unincorporated parts of the Longmont planning area are actually really encouraged through our IGAs, because when you get these weird little unincorporated enclaves that are under Boulder County regulations or Weld County regulations, it can be kind of a pain to do that administration. So County Line Road here, basically we just have this little tiny bit of the planning area that's within Weld County. The vast majority is in Boulder County. On the north end, it goes all the way up to drawing a blank on the name of that road. Zach, help me out here. Drawing a blank. Okay. Road up here, can't remember the name of it right now. I drive by it every day, twice a day. I don't know why it's coming to mind. But anyway, it goes south to about, south of Pike Road, over past Airport Road to 75th Street. So decent sized area, but there's some fun nuance coming up. All right, here's our future land use and transportation system map. This shows our future land use categories for the entire city of Longmont. Everything in this blue line is going to be our planning area. This is where I play tour guide for a moment. You'll notice that all these green areas around here, these are permanently preserved open space. Keyword permanent. If it's green on the land use map, it's not going to be developed. Period, full stop. These are properties that either are owned outright by the Boulder County, Weld County, City of Longmont, or they have some sort of permanent conservation easement across them. So a lot of these agricultural lands that you see on the north end of town are in fact maybe owned by the county or owned by some other entity, but they have a conservation easement over them to enable them to stay in farming uses for quite some time. So it does look similar to the zoning map, but it does have a broader focus. You can clearly see that this blue area, our planning area, is almost entirely encircled by permanently preserved open space. The vast majority of lands that are within the LPA are also built out. So what that means is we can only grow inwards and upwards. So one, common misconception that we hear in the public quite a bit is we're building on all of our open lands. We're building on vacant land. Vacant land does not equal open land. It doesn't have a designation if it's vacant necessarily. If it has a designation, if it's green on the map, it's not getting touched unless it's getting some sort of park amenity on it. So the other thing I will point out to you, all of this in yellow and orange, These are all of the areas of town where you can build single-family homes. The yellow is single-family residential or single-family neighborhood, which is exactly what it sounds like. The orange is going to be mixed neighborhood, which is where you will see smaller lot single family. This is where you would see your duplexes, your townhouses, maybe some lower density garden style apartment complexes, but not your large not the large apartment complexes that you would see along, say, Hover or Ken Pratt. That is a totally different animal than what's allowed in mixed neighborhood. All right. Let's get my things. Now I'm going to shift to our current land development code. As I noted, the zoning map was redone, our zoning code was redone in 2018. The zoning districts, were simplified a lot. So we went down to 14 conventional districts from, in the 20s. What this did is it increased flexibility, it promotes innovative development, and it frankly just makes it easier to administer. Most PUDs were eliminated and rezoned to corresponding conventional zoning districts. As I mentioned, there are now 14 conventional districts plus the overlays for Airport and Terry Lake. We only have 3 PUDs left in town. Prospect, Irwin Thomas, which includes Costco, gravel mining operation, the True North Attainable Housing Development, and Quail Ridge, which is just south of the rec center and museum. Prospect is something that I think would always and forever be a planned unit development because it is such a unique community that doesn't conform to any of our current zoning districts. And I would say that's a really good example of an appropriate use of PUD zoning. So the biggest challenges, honestly, that we have are not regulatory, but what the market will support. We always hear why isn't the city building X, or why are they only building Y? City doesn't build anything. Private developers and property owners, let's rephrase this. The city builds very, very little. The vast majority of development in the city is done by the private market. We can set parameters for compact, walkable, mixed-use neighborhoods, but ultimately banks are only going to finance what has a proven track record. Developers are going to develop what they can make money at. It's the nature of the beast. Economies of scale do make, unfortunately, small independent groceries in these small neighborhood, the old corner stores of yore, they do make it very difficult to operate at a profit unless they're very, very niche. So just wanted to touch a little bit, just to kind of discuss going back to some of the discussion items from board member Honoron at the last meeting, just to touch on that as it relates to our zoning map, our land development code. Is that one thing to consider is that a lot of our residential neighborhoods are subject to covenants and restrictions that would require modifications in order to implement a lot of the recommendations that were discussed last week or last month. It's not to say they don't have a ton of value. However, there are some very real and practical barriers to that. The other thing I'll note is that while there are state statutes governing accessory dwelling units, they no longer allow HOAs to forbid ADUs so long as they meet code requirements. In many cases, parcel configuration is such that construction of an ADU wouldn't be practical or possible. So a lot of our neighborhoods are built in a way that are really difficult to retrofit. Talking about multiple dwellings on one lot, we do actually permit a lot of the recommendations that were discussed last month. You could do multiple dwellings on one lot subject to density, subdivision, and addressing requirements. We would probably treat it similar to multifamily from a zoning and definition standpoint. We have seen some proposals here and there for essentially a condo approach to ownership of units, where it'd be a common lot, but each kind of individual house is owned, but it's kind of a condo type situation. We do already have fairly compact minimum lot sizes in our residential zoning districts. For example, in that residential mixed neighborhood district that I referenced earlier, if a lot is on an alley, and can be accessed by an alley, it only needs to be 3,500 square feet. So there's a lot of flexibility in there. Additionally, we do have very robust home occupation allowances. And if you look at, we have a nice huge table of allowed and allowable permitted land uses in zoning districts. In every single one of our zoning districts, urban agriculture is permitted as an accessory use. So if there's another use there as a primary, you could also do an urban agriculture. So there's really nothing stopping someone from doing that. Additionally, we do have a mixed-use neighborhood district that is intended to allow for smaller scale commercial uses, intended to serve adjacent residential uses. One area where you would see this is the intersection of Clover Basin and Airport Road, where the new Ziggy's is. That area is zoned for mixed-use neighborhood. So it's a lot of information. My voice will go out before long. Zach, if there's any history you want to jump in on, feel free. This is where it gets fun. So where was I going to be? This slide and the next slide are really a story of contrasting approaches to land development regulations. In Longmont, this is our zoning map. You can clearly see defined districts, which provide predictability about what uses are on the ground and what could be permitted in the future. As you can see from these large swaths of yellow, it's a lot of single family residential. I'll touch back on that in a moment. So planned unit developments are in light pink. We've got 3 of them. We don't have a ton of them. Zoning does not cover the entire planning area. It only covers what's been incorporated into the city of Longmont. It codifies specific uses as well as development regulations, as development standards, and our processes for how we get there. All right, fun contrast time. This is one of our neighbors to the south. This is Westminster. As you will see from their zoning map, it's a giant PUD. Basically they never met a PUD they didn't like. This type of zoning where you basically have every neighborhood has their own specific standards. It lacks predictability. It can be really restrictive because each specific PUD has very specific things they allow. And from a staff standpoint, this type of zoning code is an absolute nightmare to administer. So I think staff, when we eliminated the PUDs, was quite happy about that because it's just much more predictable. It's much easier to administer because if you get an inquiry about one of these projects, you don't have to go back to the files and figure out what does the adopted PUD say for this property. So it's a much more straightforward process. All right, I'm going to shift gears. Like I said, this is the fire hose for planning and land use in Longmont. So I'm going to give you a quick overview of historic preservation in Longmont. This is one of the programs that I administer. I see a hand from Board Member Solomeo.
Yeah, maybe before you transition, I guess, in relation to what I remember from our last conversation and how it parlays well into all this is, I'd love to hear a good description of was it labeled as the regional centers? When they came about and when was the first one? How much, yeah, has expansion. I think that's definitely sort of the nail on the head of our curiosity. We're psyched on family homes and all the things, but those big blaring red ones are definitely our biggest curiosity.
Yeah,
Mine. Sorry, I'll speak for myself.
Yeah, so regional center, mixed use regional center. It's this is where you're going to see your big box. These are your destinations. You don't see a lot of them because they serve a very large area. So what do you have in your regional center areas? You've got Walmart, you've got the Village of the Peaks down here. You've got this area, the Harvest Junction area as well. So you're going to see, let's see, up here, you've got, your hospital area, the Walmart and adjacent to Sandstone over here. So this is where you're going to see the big things that serve a wider area. I can't tell you exactly when they came into being, but they've been in existence in some form or fashion, possibly under a different name. But basically the idea is you have these areas that allow for the big box that serves a huge area. So it's not necessarily, they aren't necessarily going to be the most walkable neighborhoods or the most walkable things. You know, we do require connectivity within these regional centers when we are doing, you know, our site plan review and such. But, you know, for the most part, you're not going to be walking home from Costco with a giant vat of toilet paper. So they're intended to be more auto oriented. I see one more hand up.
That's me. So thinking about the permanently preserved open spaces, I know Wheat Ridge got a conservation grant and they've been working on a Regenerate Wheat Ridge program for the city-owned spaces for better agricultural management. And I know we've talked about that as a board too. Is that a topic that you're going to cover with us today?
That is something I would 100% punt to our Parks and Natural Resources Department. That is not our lane. So yeah, I'm going to shift over to historic preservation and talk about that a bit. One of the statements that we always talk about in historic preservation circles is the greenest building is the one that already exists. This is a building that's not going to go in the landfill. It's already had its impact. There's a lot of discussion about energy efficiency and how do we make these more efficient. There are a lot of tools that are possible for that. So a lot of what we do is education as well. So basically, as a historic preservation 101, Longmont is what is called a certified local government. This is a federal designation. It's administered by the State Historic Preservation Office, which is History Colorado here. The benefits are it opens up the ability for funding and technical assistance of a few different types, tax credits, some grants. We were actually the first certified local government in the state of Colorado. So we have been a local government since 1971. The Historic Preservation Commission, it does review proposals for exterior alterations to designated landmarks. It reviews potential landmark designations, creation of historic districts, demolition requests. It also does historic preservation related planning and outreach. So as a CLG, the commission must consist of at least 40% of qualified professionals, which means architects, planners, historians, people with backgrounds in construction, backgrounds in planning, landscape architecture. There's a whole host of them. But that is because we do make very technical recommendations, as that commission makes very technical recommendations. And so that they can, really fully evaluate proposals before them. If you're ever interested in watching one of the meetings, we do meet on the first Thursday of each month at 5 p.m. Don't think the meetings are live streamed, but they are recorded and posted for future viewing as well. All right. So we talk about designation. You hear about National Register districts or National Register landmarks versus locally designated landmarks or districts. So ultimately, National Register identifies and recognizes. Local designation is what actually protects. Local landmarks are designated by ordinance. There are specific criteria for them. If you are a landmark, if the property is a landmark, there are restrictions on exterior alterations as well as demolition. So we would do additional reviews through the certificate of appropriateness process. There are also some state tax credits and potential grant eligibility for local landmarks as well. On the National Register side, there aren't any restrictions or additional reviews for alterations or demolition. There are some tax credits available for commercial properties if you're a National Register landmark. And if you do pursue those, that would require additional review and restriction. So we have 142 landmarks, kind of hard to see on this map, but each little triangle is a landmark. They are scattered throughout the city, but mostly concentrated within the original town core. Our most recent landmark is the Tower of Compassion in Kanemoto Park, and that was designated in 2024. It is basically it just met its 50-year eligibility criteria. So not only is that a locally designated landmark now, but as of last year, it is listed on the National Register of Historic Places as well because of its significance and its association with the Japanese American community, and particularly in World War II. I'm happy to talk more about it. It's a fun story, not fun. It's an interesting story, and it's a very unique feature of Longmont. Historic districts, we don't have any local historic districts in the city. We do have a process for establishing them. We do have to have owner consent of a majority of owners. It's a high bar to establish them there. It takes a lot of work to get a locally designated historic district because frankly, a lot of people just don't want to be told what they can and can't do with their house. That's what it comes down to. We do have 3 National Register historic districts, and again, those are an identification as opposed to a protection. So we do our 3 National Register districts are going to be the East Side, the West Side, and downtown. All right. This is where I'm kind of wrapping things up a little bit. So let's talk a little bit about the intersection of planning and sustainability advisory board discussions, specifically our recent and current planning initiatives in the city of Longmont. So first, it is really important to note that Longmont has long been a trailblazer in the planning world in Colorado. We were the first certified local government. We were the first in the state of Colorado to eliminate parking minimums. We beat the state regulations that required that. We were ahead of the curve. We were the first community in the state to do an inclusionary housing ordinance. We have permitted ADUs, accessory dwelling units, for decades in some form or fashion. On the topic of unrelated persons living together, we had a restriction, but it was probably one of the most liberal rules in the state. So prior to HB 24,007, we did permit up to 5 unrelated people to live in one dwelling unit. So on this topic, we do, this is codified within our family definition in the code. The city council did take this up last week and decided to table it. The general sentiment was, to have the definition change ready to go, but they were just kind of in a wait and see mode to see if there were any changes at the state level. In the meantime, we are not enforcing this limitation, which ensures compliance with 24,007.
Hey, Jennifer, real quick,
Yeah.
can you talk a little bit more about what that actually means and why it pertains to sustainability and these other components that you've been talking about? If that's clear to everyone, that's fine, but I think it's not, if you're not steeped in this world, about why we would be talking about unrelated people being able to live together.
So it really gets down to affordability. And you see these types of restrictions a lot in college towns. Boulder and Fort Collins both had pretty, U+2, so you couldn't have, a giant college party house basically. But it really gets to affordability. It also really gets to, changing definitions of families. It's unfortunate, but there are occasions where, many times there are a lot of cost burdened people in the city and in the state. And sometimes the only way you can make it work is if you have a bunch of roommates or have 2 families sharing a dwelling unit. So that's really what it gets to, I think, is at the heart of it is the affordability question. So with that, I'm going to touch base on some of our recent initiatives, and this is where Zach will be popping in to talk a little bit more about things. We do have a sustainability evaluation system. Our Main Street corridor, we have a Main Street corridor plan and did some code amendments several years ago to prohibit new auto-oriented uses on that corridor. Again, we eliminated parking minimums. We now have parking maximums. We tell you we don't want to see this much parking. And ultimately, what that means, it doesn't mean you're not going to see parking get developed because, again, banks, developers, they have certain thresholds they need to meet. What it means is we're going to let the market decide how much parking they actually need. Again, we did we've allowed ADUs for decades. We did some tweaks to our regulations to ensure compliance with state statutes, done some updates to our landscape code. We've done some standards for EV parking and charging stations. Take it away, Zach.
Yeah, and all of these have some connection just between, again, the intersection of the environment, sustainability, protected areas, and development and growth, the human environment interaction, how we build our physical spaces. A lot of what I do touches on some of these, or I was involved in these projects. The sustainability evaluation system is what we use on the development side in the event that there's proposed development within proximity to protected wetland or riparian areas. And that's a process that we go through that we've actually successfully gone through the process now of taking projects to council and properly evaluating the impacts and the mitigation for those developments. Auto-oriented uses on Main Street, landscape code updates, and EV parking and charging station standards are all code updates that we've worked on similarly. Whether in response to guidance and direction from the state, or it was just, we have the Main Street Corridor Plan, which is part of our comp plan, that gave this suggestion that, again, limiting auto-oriented uses on Main Street is the type of thing that it might take a really long time for that to look different physically in the space, but it's going to have a real impact in the long term, from an environmental and sustainability perspective. So in my position as the senior planner in that role, this is some of the stuff that I'm working on. Some of these items we have taken to this board in the past for feedback. I expect we'll have additional items to bring in the future, whether they're, drive-through related in response to recent direction from council or, anything else we come up with. But this is kind of where my role interacts with this board, and I just wanted to share some of that.
Thanks, Zach.
Yep.
All right, so current initiatives. So currently we are working on compliance for the transit-oriented communities requirement. The city was awarded a transit-oriented community infrastructure grant for the first and main transit station. So we are now expediting our compliance report to ensure that we meet all the state's regulations for that. This is one of those cases where for Longmont, I know a lot of other cities and municipalities in the state have been, we'll say, less than enthusiastic about state planning requirements. This is a case where for Longmont, more than it really is a reporting requirement for us because we already do allow the type of density within these corridors that the statute encourages. So we are working on potential code amendment per council direction to potentially allow attached single-family residential uses within our residential single-family zoning district. So that would be duplexes, triplexes, some types of townhouses, to open up the ability for more options in those areas. We are also pursuing creation of a new mixed-use innovation and redevelopment zoning district with application to an area that includes the sugar factory and future first and main transit station. Zach has been working with a team on landscape plan templates. And then, as I mentioned, we're working on the first and main transit station. That is going to be a mixed-use project with structured parking, multifamily, residential, commercial, wrapped around that multifamily. It is part of an RTD transit, bus rapid transit line. So this is something that's been in the works for a very long time, and it's finally starting to see some fruition. And as Zach mentioned, we are also looking at where we allow drive-through uses and kind of what are the implications and if that should change. So Zach, you want to talk a little bit about the templates?
Yeah, sure. And that's a long time effort. Now we've been working on this for a couple of years, but for residential homeowners who want to do a turf conversion on their properties, the state a couple of years ago in 2024 mandated that every HOA have their own approved templates for turf conversions. And we, the city, created some templates that are city approved that HOAs can use and give out to their residents, for free and with plants and examples that you can get from places like the Flower Bin locally. We're also working on a template example for commercial uses right now that would have the same effect. So if again, in the event of a commercial use that has a large area of non-functional turf that they wanted to save water on and do a conversion, then we have examples that we can provide there as well. I see one hand up.
Thank you. That was me. When you said turf, it made me think of artificial turf. Are you talking just alternatives to just traditional lawns? You'd probably know this better than me, but I'm not sure like the long-term effect of, I mean, I know you save on water with an artificial surface, but is it harmful in the long term, in your opinion?
So here's where we're at on artificial turf. We did include a clause in the most recent code update to the landscape code that disallows what's called non-functional artificial turf. So if it's in place of existing non-functional, living turf, then it's not permitted, or if it's being used in place of live landscaping in an area that doesn't serve a purpose. So like a turf field that's used for athletics in a park, that's still an area where artificial turf is considered functional and it would be allowed. But we from a sustainability perspective kind of discourage the use of artificial turf in other places like your yards or in landscape plans in designs that are going through the city review process, just because we're Colorado, right? It's very sunny. It's going to be, 85 degrees for the rest of the week. And artificial turf has plastics and rubber in it that, they don't do well in the sun after a couple of years and they don't biodegrade. So we try to discourage that as much as possible.
It also gets extremely hot and contributes to the urban heat island effect. Speaking as someone who I thought it was going to drop from heat stroke at the last Leftapalooza.
Yeah. Yeah. So valid point. I did my best, kind of through that process to limit the use of new artificial turf as much as possible. There's still that caveat that's in the code, but we did what we could.
Great. Thank you. All right, so future initiatives. So right now we are all pretty darn busy, but there are some additional compliance things that are needed for the state level by the end of the year. One is a strategic growth element, the other is a water supply element. A lot of these are things we can kind of glean from what we already have, but we will be doing a vacant and underutilized land analysis as part of the strategic growth element. These we're kind of in a different position because they're looking at different kind of not requirements, but different ways to do it depending on where you are in your comprehensive planning process. We are due for an update. I can't say when for sure that will happen because it does need to be funded by City Council, and those are not inexpensive endeavors. So basically we have things that we're working on, we have things that we will continue to be working on. Many of our current initiatives are longer term ongoing things that will definitely carry us into the next couple of years, I would say. But we do, looking down the road, have quite a bit more on our plate. So in terms of, I just want to touch base on community engagement. So we have different projects that are going to have different levels of community engagement, just depending on what they are, depending on, varying legal requirements, that we will have some level of community engagement for our input opportunities for potential code updates. For the MUIR, we will be kind of kicking that effort off in probably in the next month or so. So that is one, because the creation of the district is what's called legislative. So it has a different standard than the actual application of it to the sugar factory area, because that's when it becomes quasi-judicial. I'll bore you with the specifics, but when we look at applying it to a specific area, we do have specific notification and neighborhood meeting and other posted notice requirements as well. Obviously, when we do an update to Envision Longmont, We will definitely be doing a very robust community engagement process for that. You know, we don't do things in private, we do things open and in the sunshine. So especially when we're doing projects that impact the larger community, it's important to get input from the larger community. What form that takes, sometimes it can be a neighborhood meeting, it can be you know, type of online type of input. We do our neighborhood meetings for major development projects. We do them in a virtual live stream format. And we found that it really fosters a much greater level of participation than the standard, you know, in-person meeting that has a dozen staff members and 3 people from the public showing up. Those Parks and Recreation episodes are funny because they're true. But yeah, so there will have opportunities for in-person, we'll have opportunities for virtual, and you know, and you can always reach out to staff if you have specific questions on a project. So with that, I am done talking, and I will turn the floor back over to the board, and be happy to answer any questions.
Go ahead, Daniel.
Thanks. Thanks so much for this, Jennifer. You mentioned it quite a few times, the needing to let the market make a lot of these decisions. But I was wondering if maybe you could speak a little bit to how the city is conducting economic analysis for planning zones and making its decisions. And so I thought your grocery comment was particularly poignant, because the reason small grocers can't turn a profit in this city is because we did allow the city permitted big box stores to come in and price them out of the market. And I think, when I read Envision Longmont, one of my biggest concerns is those regional centers do run, in my opinion, counter to our goals to diversify and grow the economy. They shrink and de-diversify the economy, but they're also significant negative impacts on our sustainability plans, carbon intensive, huge parking lots that create heat traps. And so I'm just kind of wondering, as much as we let the market make decisions, how is the city conducting that market analysis before it permits new businesses and allows that zoning to continue?
Sure. So, you know, we don't do specific, you know, development level, you know, for, you know, market analyses for specific developments. You know, there were definitely market analyses done for Envision Longmont. We do have a redevelopment and team here in planning that looks at our urban renewal areas. So they're crunching these numbers frequently, you know, looking at from a tax increment finance standpoint. And also just attracting redevelopment. Longmont Economic Development Partnership really does a lot of work with attracting primary employers. You know, the challenge with big box and consolidation, it's a nationwide issue, and ultimately, I feel like, big picture, there are federal regulatory antitrust things that need to happen in order to bust those up, frankly. That's something at a local level, we can't really, we don't have a lot of sway on that. We can establish parameters where smaller businesses can locate. But I think it's extremely difficult to basically say no chains, no big boxes. We can say you can do them here. So that's really kind of what we're looking at. You know, from a market standpoint, you know, it's as you know, much as I can wax poetic on late stage capitalism, and I will not do that. You know, this is the economic system that we have, and so this question for us is how do we set the parameters to ensure that we can make it work for us as best as possible. And I think, you know, looking at our drive-through uses is a big thing. You know, if a lot of these chains from you know, whether it's a bank, whether it's a restaurant had their way, they would have a drive-through with every box that they have. So, you know, and that's one of the things we're looking at, is because from a sustainability standpoint, they, you know, contribute to auto exhaust and greenhouse gases. So, you know, we're looking at, well, and on Main Street, essentially, we said no more. That's it. We have what we have. So, you know, tire and muffler shop, the ones that are there, the drive-throughs that are there can exist, they can stay, but as Zach indicated, long term, when that one goes away. New ones aren't, if they don't meet the, if it more than 180 days lapses, they don't get to be put in a new one. So, we're doing what we can to set the parameters for walkable, for mixed use. Part of it also is when we did redo when we updated our land development code in 2018, all of our commercial zoning districts that had previously been just single use commercial districts were all converted to mixed use zoning districts, which means that you can do multifamily high density residential as a secondary use in those areas. So basically up to 50% of an area could be multifamily. That would be what we define as high density is anything over 18 units an acre, which realistically isn't that high, but you can get definitely higher. We don't have a maximum density on those areas. So that's also why you see the large apartment complexes being built on Ken Pratt, on North Main Street, on, Hover. You see them, they're being built there because that's where they're allowed. So but at the same time, by creating those mixed use zones and allowing that mix of uses, that's our way of trying to promote walkability and reduce auto dependence where we can. It's incremental because the city isn't a developer itself. We aren't building anything. We really aren't doing the building. What we can do is we can set the parameters. And ultimately, though, if you make things too restrictive, you're not going to get anything. And realistically, people are going to drive for the cheapest goods. So it's, something we do what we can.
I just want to add for the context as well, since I worked on that Main Street corridor update in the code that specifically limited all of the auto-oriented uses on Main Street. Part of that process involved a period of public engagement where we heard significant negative feedback from the development community specifically. Developers who I'm interested in building something on this property. Now you're saying I can't do that anymore. You're hurting my business, right? There is that side of the work that we do and that we have to consider as we talk about things like this and have these types of conversations. That is a critical part of it.
Yeah, and in the development review process, for those properties on Main Street, we frequently have people come out like, "Hey, we want to do a drive-through here," and we get to say, "Nope, sorry, you can't do that." So yeah, there's definitely been pushback, but it's something that we've stuck to our guns on, basically.
Go ahead, Alec.
Is it an easy assumption that use equals like property tax? Like every different use category falls within a different taxable structure and things of that effect?
I am going to let our assistant city manager, Jen Newton, talk about that because
Welcome, Jenny.
local government finance I know enough to be dangerous.
So the land use categories are specific generally to land use, and then there are building categories that are related to the building standards that look similar often because they're residential, for example, but they're denoting kind of different standards. Similarly, the property tax component is something that's done at the county assessor level and is governed by the state. And so it's not a one for one. The way that things are, the property tax is not something that's a component of the work that happens at the city. It's something that happens at the county level, if that's helpful.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from the board? All right. Well, seeing none, Jennifer, Zach, thank you. Very much appreciated all the presentation and useful insights and context and all the fun history lesson too. Thank you.
You're very welcome. And again, if anyone has any future questions, feel free to reach out.
Will do.
Thank you.
If I could just jump in, I would say that there were a number of public engagement kind of components of future work. So we would invite you to participate in those. So just wanted to put that out there that as individuals, there might potentially be an opportunity at the board level, depending on what the project is. But just wanted to make sure that that you that we specifically invited you to participate in those as they move forward.
Absolutely. Yeah. You are all members of the community, and, keep an eye out for where everything is.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Up next on our agenda would normally be public invited to be heard. We don't have anyone signed up for that today, so we will bypass that and jump into items from staff. So I think, well, Lisa, I will defer to you on the sequence for that.
Yeah, I'll jump in with the first two items and then probably hand it off to Heather, if that's okay with you. Heather, the first two items are pretty brief. Just to let you know, we did go to council with the annual report on the 10th of March. I went on at about 10:30. There was a lot going on that evening, including the conversation around the interview process for boards and commissions. So I tried to keep my presentation pretty brief and to the point to get all the info needed to council and give them some good highlights of things. And there wasn't anything hugely specific to share. And unfortunately, Councilmember Cockover can't be here tonight to give you any of his feedback. Generally, folks were happy about the progress that we were making, and there was some good questions about where are we doing well and where could we be doing better, and a few things that they flagged for potential conversation at their upcoming retreat, which I did also want to let folks know that is March 27th and 28th, and that is open to the public if folks are interested in viewing that council retreat that's coming up. So that's that. And then I wanted to let folks know also, I know we've been tracking the building energy code conversation. We've had a handful of conversations as that process has evolved over the last year or two. That was also supposed to go on the 10th, but that got pushed to April 14th. So just wanted to keep you all in the loop on if that's something that you were interested in watching or tracking at all. That is happening now on April 14th for first reading. So just wanted to keep y'all up to date on those couple of things. And then Heather, if you're okay to take it away on the summary from the board interview process, that would be awesome.
Sure. I'm just gonna move this over in front of me so I can see it. So City Council has been talking the last few months about making changes to the board interview process to kind of streamline that a little bit and make it more succinct, I guess. And last Tuesday at their City Council meeting, they agreed to the following rules. So each board must choose and vote on a nominating committee in an open meeting. That nominating committee must be comprised of at least 2 members of the board, the staff liaison and the city council liaison. For boards that don't have a council liaison, the mayor will serve as that council liaison. All board members will be given the opportunity to participate in the interview process, and members of the nominating committee may not be current applicants. All applicants, including those reapplying, will be interviewed, and all interviews must be recorded. All applications, score sheets, and recordings must be provided to City Council for all eligible applicants. This is basically new wording for clarity, but it's always been our practice in the past. And then also boards will continue to be able to provide a formal written recommendation to City Council, and that recommendation will come from the nominating committee after interviews. Council will not be conducting additional interviews anymore because they will be sitting in with the nominating committee, and the boards will submit applicant interview questions to the city clerk's office for council's consideration, and those final interview questions will be decided upon by City Council liaison with input from the staff liaison and the board chair. Most of those rules are what our procedure has already been. The one big difference that sticks out is that we will have our council liaison be part of the interview process so that council is participating in those interviews as we're doing them. So And then they also put language in there about the interviews shall not go past like 30 minutes, but it can be up to 30 minutes. So I think the process that we've had in the past, give or take a few minutes of maybe making them a little bit longer will be sufficient. You can, for the nominating committee, at least 2 board members have to be on it. You could do the whole board if everybody decided to, as long as there's not any board members who are reapplying for a position, which is the same as what it was in the past as well. So any questions on that?
Heather, I had a quick question. Forgive my forgetfulness on this. So we came up with our sort of revised set of questions. Has that already been approved by city council or whoever needs to sign off on that list of questions?
Yeah, we did share that with the city clerk's office. I'm not sure how that process for approving them is going to go, other than the council liaison will look through them and then get input from the board chair and also the staff liaison to finalize those questions as we ask them, I think, during those interviews. Yeah. And then I think one maybe different piece is that for any scoring that we do, we just need to make sure that we get those copies back to us so that we can pass those along to city council. And then the other thing I was just going to mention is that our spring recruitment for the sustainability board and other boards that have vacancies coming up in mid-year is open currently. So if you know of people who are interested in serving on one of the boards, it doesn't have to be necessarily the sustainability board, but there are several boards who have vacancies coming up. So encourage your neighbors and whoever to apply if they're interested.
And Heather, we will have vacancies on this board too, correct? So
yeah, we
will
have one vacancy in June coming up. So
at our April meeting, I have down that we can determine the nominating committee and everything all the details Heather just went through. So that's coming up.
I guess a process clarification question too. So I think what we talked about before with our process was sort of interviewing all the candidates, giving our preferences, having an opportunity for discussion, and then sort of making a selection rather than like a raw scoring based approach, where essentially at the end we would have like a motion for a nomination of a packet of people that would be we'd vote on. And once we had a majority approval of that motion, we would move forward with that group. It sounds as though the expectation is to be a bit more numerical in the ratings and publishing of those scores.
So
It's help me reconcile that.
What we
Yeah.
did in the past, along with the questions, there was next to those questions, there was like a scoring rubric kind of thing that each person who is on the interview panel or the nominating committee would fill that out. So now we'll just make sure that we submit those to city council for official record of what each person on the nominating committee, how they rated those individuals as well, to go along with your written recommendation as a board. Does that make sense?
I guess I want to clarify, if our written recommendation is not the however many open vacant spots we have, that many highest rated scorers, but after some deliberation and consideration for the different attributes different candidates bring forward, we recommend something different than if there were 2 vacancies, something different than the top 2 scorers. Is that permissible or?
I'm not sure how that will work. I do know that city council also discussed if there are let's say you have more vacancies than you have applicants for, or like if you have only 1 vacancy and you have 4 members or 4 community members who apply for that position, if there are other boards that did not have enough, they could switch some of those candidates to serve on other boards. So the city council ultimately has the final decision on who gets appointed. But yeah,
Thank you, Heather.
I don't know how they'll do some of those intricacies for that, but
I wanted to make sure we had all of our expectations aligned and that if there were things that we needed to seek info on, that we weren't doing that at the last minute. So
yeah, there's also a possibility too that if there are if there are not enough candidates who the nominating committee feels is qualified to serve on the board, that city council could choose to leave some positions vacant as well. So
any other questions on this from anybody? Thank you, Heather. All right. Up next is items from the board. Are there any items that anyone would like to bring to the table here? We have a little more time than I expected. If anyone had something that they were hoping to find a meeting to bring it up in. Go ahead, Alyssa.
I guess just following up on my earlier question of do we have plans to meet with the Parks and Natural Resources Department to talk more about the open space land management?
Yeah, thanks, Alyssa. I'm sorry, I was gonna pop that in at the end because I forgot to mention it in my section. They are penciled in for the April meeting.
Okay,
So,
awesome.
Yep.
Thanks, Lisa.
Mm-hmm.
Easy enough. Go ahead, Ethan.
Yeah, a few things. So in between our last meeting and today's meeting, a new war started in the Middle East, and that's having major implications for energy markets, not just oil prices, but also gas. And it appears that that's just beginning, the ramifications are just beginning to be felt. Predictions are that oil prices will increase a lot more if this war continues. And that could also have implications for the construction of new infrastructure, such as gas turbines. Some analysis that I've done suggests that it's possible that the price tag for 5 new gas turbines could increase to more than $1 billion. It's already increased to $623 million. So that's something that City Council might want to be aware of. There might be a pressure point where the cost is more than the benefit. Related to that, last Friday, the Air Pollution Control Division released a revised air permit for the new gas turbines, and I've spent some time reviewing that in preparation for submitting public comments. The new public comment period will be open until April 12th. And one of the concerns I have, just in my initial review of it, is that as written, it would not require the coal plant to ever be shut down. So that's, I think, a concern if the coal plant stays open. And we also have new gas turbines that would increase pollution, not decrease pollution. And the third thing I wanted to bring up was trash around our city. I did return to the Dickens Farm Nature area twice and filled some trash bags with trash. I also submitted a service request to the city. The last time I went there, last Monday, there was nothing that apparently had been cleaned up. And so I filled another trash bag last Monday. Then I also went to the Parks Advisory meeting, which was canceled, but despite that being canceled, I had a chance to talk to staff there, let them know about it, and he said that he would inform the department. So I haven't been back there since then, but hopefully city folks are taking care of that. But it's not just that one area. When I bike around the city, I see trash all over the place, and I think it's really systemic, and it can't be taken care of with just service requests. It needs to be some kind of more systemic response.
Thank you, Ethan. Yeah. Any other items anyone wants to raise? Okay. Um, well, in that case, we'll move on from items from the board. We don't have any items from council. And then we have the informational items in the packet. Make sure you got a chance to read all of those. We don't have any discussion or action on them. That takes us to our final item, which is to adjourn the meeting. Our next session is April 15th. It is in person at standard 4:30 time. So I look forward to seeing everyone there. Do we have a motion to adjourn? Or
And
before we do, I think Lisa had something to add. Sorry.
sorry, Robert.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you mentioned the info item packets, I just wanted to call your attention to Francie had sent you all a memo in the greenhouse gas report, and just wanted to let folks know that she did, in finalizing some things, found a slight error in the waste data for the report. It didn't change things dramatically. It was pretty minor, but she will send you the revised report when she has that recalculated. So it's pretty minor, but just wanted to call your attention so you'll get the corrected version when it's ready.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. Is there a motion to adjourn now?
I motion to adjourn now.
Thanks, Alyssa. Is there a second?
Second.
All right. All those in favor? Any opposed? Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. Passes. Look forward to seeing you all on April 15th.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. See you then.
Take
Thanks
care.
all.
Bye.